Thea Brennan thought the worst day of her life had been the morning her mother Lillian was lowered into the cold West Virginia ground. But she was wrong. The worst day came 3 weeks later in a lawyer's cramped office when she learned that her mother had left her brother the family house, her sister every cent of the savings, and her, the daughter who had nursed Lillian through 4 years of cancer. Nothing but a collapsing farm nobody in Salt Hollow had stepped foot on in 60 years. Humiliated, broke, and with her teenage daughter Clover waiting in the car, Thea drove out to see what she'd been given. But what she found sealed beneath the rotting stalls of that forgotten barn would bring her to her knees. Unearth, a 170-year-old secret her family had buried to survive, and turn the daughter everyone dismissed into the most talked-about woman in all of Appalachia. Stay with me until the very end, because what Lillian hid in that barn wasn't just gold or papers. It was proof of a love so fierce and a truth so powerful that it would rewrite the Brennan name forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you believe that a mother's love sometimes looks like being passed over, that the greatest inheritances are the ones nobody else wants, and that the truth buried deepest is often the truth that sets us free, then hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Here we share stories that prove the people who love us most don't always hand us the easy path. Sometimes they hand us the hard one because they know we're the only ones strong enough to walk it. Because what Lillian Brennan did in her, well, wasn't cruelty. It was faith. Faith that out of 3 children, only Thea had the heart to uncover what had been hidden beneath those stalls for 7 generations. Thea Brennan was 52 years old, and she was sitting in a pine-paneled law office in Charleston with her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Across the desk, the estate attorney Silas Ashford was shuffling papers with the careful, apologetic slowness of a man who had already read the document and knew what was coming. To Thea's left sat her brother Corbin, 47, in a charcoal suit that cost more than her monthly mortgage. To her right sat her sister Tamsin, 49, tapping French manicured fingernails against a leather handbag. Tamsin's husband Lowell had insisted on coming too, and was pretending to read a Forbes magazine in the corner. Corbin's wife Phaedra had not bothered to disguise her boredom, and was openly scrolling her phone. Thea had come alone. Her daughter Clover, 17, was waiting in the battered Ford Bronco downstairs with a library book and a thermos of coffee. Thea had not been able to afford the gas to drive up to Charleston and still get home, so she put the trip on a credit card she had no plan for paying. Silas cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. Before I begin reading the will of Mrs. Lillian Brennan, I want to express my personal condolences. Your mother was a remarkable woman, and I considered her a friend. Let's just get through it. Silas, Corbin said. He was not unkind, exactly. He was a man who billed his time in 6-minute increments and saw no reason to suspend the habit for his mother's burial aftermath. Silas nodded and began. The preamble was standard. The bequest came next, and Thea listened with the particular stillness of someone bracing for impact. To my son, Corbin Augustus Brennan, I leave the family home at 42 Sycamore Lane, Charleston, along with all its contents, furnishings, and the surrounding 3 acres. Corbin exhaled slowly. Phaedra looked up from her phone for the first time and smiled. To my daughter, Tamsin Louise Brennan Vance, I leave the entirety of my investment portfolio, my retirement accounts, my jewelry collection, including the pieces that belong to my mother, and the full balance of my savings and checking accounts, totaling approximately $412,000. Tamsin let out a small, satisfied sound, like a woman settling into a warm bath. Lowell lowered his magazine. Silas paused. He looked at Thea. He looked back at the page. To my daughter, Thea Elizabeth Brennan, I leave the entirety of Ironwood Farm, located on Millers Creek Road in Salt Hollow, West Virginia, including the farmhouse, the barn, the outbuildings, and all 140 acres of land, to be hers solely and completely, with the express and specific instruction that none of my other heirs shall have any claim, interest, or access to said property whatsoever. The room fell into a long, strange silence. Then Tamsin laughed. Actually laughed. A sharp, disbelieving bark of a laugh. Ironwood? That rotting pile of sticks in a hollow. Mother left her the dump. Corbin said it flatly, to no one in particular, as though he were confirming an accounting error. Phaedra leaned toward Tamsin and said, not quietly, "Isn't that the place with no running water? The one with the collapsed roof?" "I think so," Tamsin murmured. "I haven't been out there since I was a child. Mother took us once." Corbin threw up in the driveway. They laughed. All of them. Corbin and Tamsin and Phaedra and even Lowell, who hadn't even known Lillian well. They laughed the way people laugh when something so absurd has happened that the only dignified response is to treat it as theater. Thea sat between them with her hands still folded in her lap, and her face burning and her eyes fixed on the wood grain of Silas Ashford's desk, and she did not cry. She would not give them that. Not ever. Silas cleared his throat again, more firmly this time. There is also a personal letter addressed to Thea from her mother. It is sealed. Mrs. Brennan's instructions were that it be given to Thea in private after the reading. He passed the envelope across the desk. Thea's name was written on the front in her mother's careful, looping hand. Thea took it with fingers that, against her will, had begun to tremble. "Well," Corbin said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Congratulations, Thea. Enjoy your farm." Thea did not open the letter in the office. She slipped it into her purse, shook Silas Ashford's hand because he was the only person in that room who had treated her mother like a human being instead of an estate, and walked out into the bright Charleston afternoon with her chin held at the careful angle of a woman who had learned, very young, how not to give an audience the satisfaction of seeing her break. Tamsin caught up to her at the elevator. "Thea, wait." Thea turned. She expected an apology, or at least a softening. She got neither. "Look, I know that was awkward in there," Tamsin said, smoothing the lapel of her cream-colored blazer. "But honestly, you should be relieved. You don't want that property. The taxes alone are going to crush you, and the structures aren't even up to code." Lowell looked it up while we were sitting there. "The county has it flagged as condemned eligible. You'd be smart to just sign it over to a developer for whatever you can get. Probably 9,000 if you're lucky." 8,000, Thea repeated. "For 140 acres of unusable hillside in a hollow nobody can find on a map, that's generous. There's a man Corbin knows. He buys up these old places for hunting leases. You take it off your hands by the end of the month. Let me give you his number." Thea looked at her sister and saw, with sudden and terrible clarity, that Tamsin had already done the math. Tamsin had sat in that office knowing exactly what the farm was worth, exactly what the savings and the house were worth, and exactly how the imbalance would land. Tamsin had not been surprised. Tamsin had been waiting. "I think I'll keep it," Thea said. Tamsin's expression flickered. "Don't be sentimental, Thea." Mother wasn't being kind. She was being old. She was confused at the end. You and I both know that. She wasn't confused. She left you a ruin. She left me a farm. Thea pressed the elevator button again, harder than necessary. "Which is more than she left me my whole life, Tamsin. So I'll take it." The elevator opened. Thea stepped in. Tamsin did not follow. Down in the parking garage, Clover was still in the Bronco, still reading, her boots up on the dashboard. She looked up when Thea opened the driver's door, and whatever she saw on her mother's face made her close the book and sit up straight. That bad. That bad. What did Grandma leave us?" Thea put the key in the ignition and looked at her 17-year-old daughter, this serious dark-eyed girl who had grown up watching her mother work 2 jobs and never complain, and she made a decision then about how this story was going to be told between them. Not as a wound, not as another thing the world had taken, as an adventure. "She left us a farm, baby. 140 acres in Salt Hollow. We're going to go look at it right now." Clover blinked. "Like today? Like right now? We're already halfway there. We got a thermos of coffee and a tank of gas and your grandmother's letter in my purse, and I want to see it before the sun goes down. You in?" Clover smiled, slow and crooked, the way her father used to smile before the cancer took him 8 years ago. "Mama, I'm always in." They drove east out of Charleston, then south, watching the land fold itself into ridges and the ridges fold themselves into hollows. The road narrowed. The cell signal died. The October light came slanting low and gold through the bare oaks and the stubborn yellow leaves of the hickories, and the air through the half-cracked window smelled of wood smoke and wet leaves and the particular cold mineral scent that mountain creeks carry in the fall. Salt Hollow appeared the way most West Virginia hollows appear, which is to say it didn't appear at all until you were already inside it. A bend in the road, a gas station with 2 pumps, a feed store with a hand-lettered sign, a Methodist church with a graveyard older than the state itself. Thea slowed the Bronco and pulled into the gas station to ask directions, because Miller's Creek Road was not on the map app, and the map app had stopped loading anyway. The man behind the counter was in his 70s, lean as a fence post, and he looked up at her over a pair of reading glasses with the unhurried attention of a man for whom every customer was an event. "Help you, ma'am. I'm looking for Ironwood Farm, Miller's Creek Road. I just inherited it." The old man went very still. He set down the newspaper he had been folding. He looked at her over the tops of his glasses, and then he looked past her, out the window, at the Bronco, where Clover was sitting with her boots back up on the dash. "You be Lillian's youngest, then?" "Yes, sir. I'm Thea. Ezra Pickens." He extended a hand across the counter. His grip was dry and warm and surprisingly gentle. "I knew your mama. Knew your grandfather Gus better. Worked his hayfields 3 summers when I was a boy." "You knew the farm?" Ezra Pickens regarded her for a long moment, and something in his face shifted in a way she could not read. "I knew of it. There's a difference. Your mama leave you that place in her will." "She did. Just you. Just me." He nodded once, slowly, as though confirming something he had suspected for a long time. "Then you better go see it before dark, Miss Thea, and you better take the letter she left you with you. You're going to want to read it sitting on that porch." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ezra Pickens drew her a map on the back of a feed store flyer with a pencil he kept tucked behind his ear. 3 miles up the Hollow Road, past the second wooden bridge, then a left at the Leaning Oak. No street sign, no mailbox. The driveway was a pair of ruts in the grass, and if she missed it, she'd end up at the old Cunningham place, which had burned down in 1994. "One more thing, Miss Thea," he said, pressing the map into her palm. "When you get to the barn, and you'll know which one I mean, there's only the one, you take a long look at the stalls. The horse stalls along the east wall. Your mama wanted you to look at them. That's all I'll say." "Mr. Pickens, what do you mean?" "Ezra, and I mean exactly what I said. No more, no less. Some things a person has to find for themselves, or they don't mean anything. Your mama understood that. So did your grandfather, Gus. So did his father before him. Now go on. Lights going." She drove. Clover held the map in her lap and read out the landmarks. And when they crossed the second wooden bridge, a single lane span over a creek, so clear Thea could see the rust-colored stones on the bottom, Clover whispered, "Mama, this is beautiful." It was. Even in its abandonment, the land was beautiful. The hollow opened into a wider bowl of pasture rimmed by ridges going amber and crimson with the late autumn. A red-tailed hawk circled low above the field. A line of sycamores marked the creek's path, their bark white as bone in the slanting light. And then they came around the Leaning Oak, turned left into the rutted drive, and Ironwood Farm rose up in front of them. Thea stopped the Bronco. She did not get out. Not at first. She just sat behind the wheel and looked. The farmhouse was a 2-story clapboard, painted white once, gray now, with a wraparound porch sagging on the left side, and 3 of the porch posts replaced at some point with rough cedar logs that had never been painted to match. The roof had moss on its north slope and a tarp pinned over what might have been a hole near the chimney. The windows were intact, but coated with a film of dust thick enough to obscure the curtains behind them. The front yard was knee-high in dead goldenrod and Queen Anne's lace, and a rusted iron pump stood crooked at the side of the house where a well had once been. Behind the house, set back about 50 yards across an overgrown pasture, stood the barn. In the barn, Thea saw it and felt something tighten in her chest that she could not name. The barn was enormous. 2.5 stories, hand-hewn timber frame, gambrel roof, the silver chestnut siding still mostly intact. It had to be 170 years old, maybe more. It dwarfed the house. It dominated the property. It looked, even in its dereliction, like a building that had been built to last forever. "Mama," Clover said quietly. Mama, that barn is huge. I see it, baby. Why is the barn so much bigger than the house? Thea did not answer, because she did not know. But the question lodged somewhere under her ribs and would not let go. They got out. The autumn air hit them clean and cold. Thea climbed the sagging porch steps, testing each board with her weight, and found the front door unlocked. It opened with a long, slow groan. The inside of the house smelled of mice and wood smoke and the dry herbal sweetness of a place that had been closed up for a very long time. The furniture was draped in sheets. The floors were heart pine, scarred and dusty but solid. There was a fireplace big enough to stand in, a kitchen with a hand pump at the sink and a black iron cookstove, a staircase with a banister worn smooth by 7 generations of hands. Clover walked through the room slowly, her fingers trailing along the dust-furred edge of a sheet. Mama, this place is not condemned. This place is just sleeping. Thea's throat closed. She turned away so Clover wouldn't see her face. They had been inside maybe 10 minutes when they heard the truck. A battered green pickup came rolling up the drive and stopped beside the Bronco. The man who got out was maybe 60, broad-shouldered, with a salt and pepper beard and the unhurried posture of a man who had never once in his life been in a hurry. He wore a barn coat, a flannel shirt, and jeans soft with washing. He raised one hand in a slow wave and waited at the bottom of the porch steps. Ma'am, didn't mean to startle you. I'm Weston Ballard. I run the veterinary practice at the bottom of the hollow. Saw the smoke from your radiator and figured I'd come check. Most folks who come up this drive aren't expected, and most of those that aren't expected are lost. I'm not lost, Thea said. She came to the porch railing. I'm Thea Brennan, Lillian's daughter. This is mine now. Weston Ballard looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were the soft mountain water gray of a man who had spent his life looking at things carefully before he spoke about them. Well, he said quietly, I'll be. Weston Ballard came up the porch steps slowly. The way a man approaches a horse, he doesn't want to spook, and he shook Thea's hand with a grip that was warm and calloused and honest. Your mother was a friend of mine, he said. I tended the last of the Brennan cattle before your grandfather Gus passed. Lillian used to drive out here once a year, every October, and walk the property line alone. I'd see her truck parked at the mouth of the drive. I never followed her up. Seemed like something private. Once a year. Thea said, for how long? 30-some years. Ever since Gus died. She'd come out, walk the fields, sit on that porch for an hour, and drive back. Never brought a soul with her. Not your brother. Not your sister. Not you. He paused, and then he said carefully, I always wondered what she was coming out here to see. Thea felt the letter in her purse like a weight. Dr. Ballard. Weston. The barn. Do you know anything about the barn? He looked toward it, across the pasture, and something moved in his face that she could not read. The same something she had seen in Ezra Pickens. I know it was the first structure built on this land. Your great-great-grandfather put it up in 1847, 12 years before he built the house. Most farms you build a house first. The Brennans built the barn first. He looked back at her. I always thought that was interesting. The light was failing. The ridges to the west had gone from crimson to bruised purple, and the first stars were pricking through above the tree line. Thea knew she ought to get Clover back on the road, find a motel, come back in the morning. But Ezra's words were ringing in her ears like a bell that would not stop. Your mama wanted you to look at them. The horse stalls along the east wall. Clover, she called. Get the flashlight from the glove box. We're going to the barn. The barn door was secured with a rusted iron chain looped through a pair of hand-forged hasps. No padlock, just the chain rusted into itself from decades of weather. Weston worked it loose with patient hands while Thea held the flashlight. The door, when it finally gave, swung inward on hinges that shrieked like something alive. The smell that rolled out was old hay and older wood and the faint mineral tang of iron. Thea lifted the flashlight and stepped in. The interior was vast. The ceiling vaulted up into the gambrel peak, so high the light beam could barely find it. Hand-hewn beams the size of telephone poles crossed overhead, joined with wooden pegs, no nails. The threshing floor was wide-planked chestnut, worn smooth in a central track where generations of animals had walked. To the west wall, cattle stanchions. To the east wall, the horse stalls. 4 of them wooden, their doors hanging half off the hinges, the iron feed rings still bolted to the posts. Thea walked to the east wall slowly. The beam of her flashlight trembled a little in her hand. She swept it across the floor of the first stall. Packed earth, straw-littered, unremarkable. The second stall, the same. The third, the fourth. She stepped inside the first stall and knelt. She pressed her palm flat against the floor, and she felt it. Not warmth, not sound, just the faintest hollow give of her weight against the earth. A give that should not have been there if the floor beneath was truly what it appeared. Packed dirt on solid ground. She pressed harder. The floor yielded, almost imperceptibly, like something hollow was beneath it. "Weston," she said, and her voice had gone very quiet. "Can you bring the flashlight closer?" He came. He knelt beside her. He pressed his own broad palm to the floor beside hers, and she watched his face as he felt what she had felt, and she watched his eyes widen. "Oh, Lord," he said softly. "There's something under here. There's a room under here." He swept a hand across the straw, scattering it to the edges of the stall, and as the packed earth came clear, Thea saw it. A seam in the dirt, rectangular, 6 feet by 3, the outline of something sealed and forgotten. Dirt had been packed over it for what must have been 100 years or more. But the seam was there, faint and absolutely deliberate. Clover was at the stall door, flashlight held high, her eyes huge. Mama, what is that?" "I don't know, baby. Should we open it?" Thea looked at Weston. Weston looked at her. "There's a pitchfork by the tack room," he said, "and a shovel. I'll get them." He was back in 30 seconds. They worked together, the two of them, while Clover held the light. Thea scraped the packed earth from the seam with the edge of the shovel, and Weston pried with the pitchfork, and the dirt came away in clumps that had not been disturbed since before either of their grandfathers had been born. Beneath the earth was wood, thick, dark oak planks, and beneath the oak, when they got the first plank up, was a flight of stone steps leading down into a darkness that breathed the cold air of something sealed for 7 generations. Thea stood at the edge of those steps with her flashlight shaking in her hand, and she heard her mother's voice, low and steady, the way it had been in the last weeks before the morphine took her. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do, Thea. You're the one I chose. You're the only one who could." She took the first step down. The stone steps descended 7 feet into the earth and ended in a low doorway framed with hand-cut limestone. The chamber beyond was larger than Thea expected, perhaps 15 feet square, with a ceiling of oak beams laid across the stone, the whole of it dry as a book left on a high shelf for 170 years. The air smelled of cold stone and wood oil and something else, something faintly sweet like cured tobacco or dried lavender. Thea swept the flashlight across the space, and her breath left her body in a single soft sound. Against the far wall stood a row of 3 narrow wooden bunks, built into the stone, each one long enough for a grown person to lie down. Folded on each bunk was a wool blanket, dark with age but intact, preserved by the dryness. On a small wooden shelf above the bunks sat a tin cup, a tin plate, a candle in a handmade iron holder, and a leather-bound book. On the opposite wall was a crude table and 2 chairs. On the table, a kerosene lamp with its glass globe still clean. Beside the lamp, 3 more books. And in the corner of the table, set squarely as though placed there yesterday, a cast-iron strongbox about the size of a bread box, its lid sealed with an old brass padlock. Clover came down the steps behind her, and Weston followed, and the 3 of them stood in that chamber and did not speak for a long moment, because the chamber itself was speaking, and what it was saying required a kind of silence to hear. "Mama," Clover whispered, "what is this place?" Thea crossed to the shelf above the bunks and took down the leather-bound book with hands that had gone numb. She opened it under the flashlight beam. The first page, in ink gone brown with age, read, "The record of the Ironwood Station, kept by Thea Brennan, begun in the year of our Lord, 1851. May the Almighty bless all who pass through these doors toward freedom." Thea turned the page with a finger that trembled. March the 4th, 1851. Tonight we received 4 souls from the Pritchard farm outside Lewisburg. 2 men, 1 woman, 1 child of perhaps 6 years. They rested the day beneath the east stalls and departed at moonset toward the Simpson crossing. The woman was called Hannah. The child was her daughter. She said her daughter's name was Grace. I told her that in this house, Grace would always be a welcome name. Thea made a sound that was not quite a word. Weston came up beside her and looked over her shoulder at the page, and she heard him breathe in, slow, the way a man breathes when a thing is being explained to him that he has suspected all his life. It was a station, he said. Your great-great-grandfather ran an underground railroad station. Out of this barn. Out of these very stalls. My whole life, Thea said. My whole life, and nobody told me. Not my mother. Not my grandfather. Nobody. They couldn't, Mama, Clover said quietly, and she was already reading over her mother's shoulder, her dark eyes moving down the page. Look at what he wrote. It's dangerous to write this down. If anyone in Hollow found this book in 1851, they'd have burned the barn and hanged him. They kept it secret because they had to. Thea turned more pages. The book was full. Entry after entry, in Isaiah's careful hand. Names of freedom seekers, dates, the routes they took, the weather, the prayers he said for them as they slipped away into the dark. Some entries were just a single line. 5 souls. All safe. Others ran for a full page, describing the courage of a particular man, or the fever of a particular child, or the way the Hollow's Methodist preacher had nearly caught them one August night and had been persuaded, through a combination of lies and whiskey, to leave. The journal ended in 1863. Behind it, on the shelf, was a second journal. This one was kept by Isaiah's son. It continued the record into the post-war years, documenting correspondence with families of freedom seekers who had made it north, tracking their children, sending money when he could spare it. And behind that journal was a third, kept by the next generation, and a fourth. The Brennan family had kept the secret of the Ironwood Station and quietly maintained contact with descendants of the people who had passed through it for 4 generations. Thea set the journals down. She walked to the strong box. On top of it, tied with a faded green ribbon, was an envelope. The envelope said, in her mother's handwriting, for Thea. Read this first. She sat down in one of the chairs at the table. Her legs would not hold her anymore. Clover came and sat in the other chair. Weston stepped back to the doorway, quietly, giving them the room. Thea broke the seal. My darling girl, if you're reading this, then you have done what I hoped you would do. You came to the farm. You went to the barn. You listened to Ezra, or you listened to your own heart, and you found what 7 generations of Brennans have kept hidden beneath those stalls. You're probably angry with me. I would be in your place. I have spent 40 years watching the world treat you as the overlooked one, the quiet one, the one they forgot to invite. I watched your brother and sister grow into the kind of people who measure love in square footage and bank balances. And I watched you, Thea. I watched you nurse your father through cancer. I watched you raise Clover on nothing. I watched you stay tender in a world that punished tenderness. And I knew, Thea, I knew that out of 3 children, only one of you would understand what this place is. Only one of you would protect it instead of selling it. Only one of you would read Isaiah's journals and weep instead of calculating their auction value. Your brother would have torn the chamber apart looking for gold. Your sister would have called the developer the same week. They're not bad people, my love. They're simply not the people this farm needs. You are. I gave them the house and the savings because I owed them an inheritance. I gave you the truth because the truth was the only thing in our family worth keeping. The strongbox holds what little gold Isaiah was given by grateful families over the years. He never spent it. None of them did. It was held in trust to one day build something that honored the souls who passed through. It also holds the 4 generations of correspondence with the descendants of those souls. There are people alive today, Thea, whose great-grandparents slept in those bunks. They have written to our family across the decades. They have asked, again and again, whether their family's history could ever be made public. Until now, our answer was always the same. We are not ready. The Hollow is not ready. The world is not ready. I am leaving that decision to you. Open a chamber, or seal it back up. Tell the world, or guard the silence. Whichever you choose, I will be proud of you, because the choice is yours and you have earned it with the whole of your beautiful, overlooked life. I love you, Thea. I always loved you most. I just couldn't say it while your brother and sister were watching. Mama. Thea finished the letter and set it down on the table, and she put her face in her hands, and for the first time since the morning Lillian had died, she wept. Not the silent, careful tears she had allowed herself at the funeral. Real weeping. The kind that comes from a place a person has been sitting on for 40 years. Clover got up from her chair and came around the table and wrapped her arms around her mother's shoulders and held her. Weston stepped quietly back up the stone stairs to give them the room, and Thea heard him pause at the top and heard him say, very softly, to no one in particular, "Lillian, you old wonder. You did it." When Thea could breathe again, she lifted her head and looked at the strongbox. Clover passed her a hairpin from her own braid. The brass padlock was old enough that it gave to a hairpin in less than a minute. The lid lifted on hinges that whispered. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the gold coins, perhaps 30 of them gold dollars and half-eagles, dated from the 1840s through the 1880s. Beneath them, a thick stack of letters bound with string, the topmost dated 1889, the bottommost dated 3 years ago, in 2022. Beneath the letters, a folded document on heavy paper. Thea unfolded it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map of the chamber, the barn, and the property, with annotations in 4 different hands across 4 generations, marking the burial places of 3 freedom seekers who had not survived the journey and had been laid to rest in the back pasture under unmarked stones. 3 graves. 3 souls who had died, trying to reach freedom, and whose names her family had quietly kept for 170 years. Thea looked at her daughter. Clover looked back at her, her eyes wet. "Mama," Clover said, "we have to tell the world. We can't keep this a secret anymore." "I know, baby. Those people deserve to be remembered. Their families deserve to know." "I know." They climbed back up the stone steps slowly, as though leaving a church. Weston was waiting in the barn, sitting on an overturned bucket with his hands folded between his knees. He stood when they came up. "Thea, I don't know what was in that letter, and I don't need to know, but I want you to hear something from me before another minute passes. There's a woman in town named Melanie Dubois. She runs the historical archives at the county library. Her great-grandmother was a freed woman who came up through this hollow in 1858. She has spent her whole life looking for the station that helped her family. Her whole life, Thea." His voice had gone rough. "If you're willing to share what you found, I would like very much to call her in the morning." Thea swallowed. She thought of the letters in the strongbox, 200 years of correspondence kept faithful by her family. She thought of Melanie Dubois, whoever she was, looking her whole life for an answer her ancestors had carried with them out of bondage. "Call her tonight," Thea said. They sealed the chamber back up loosely, just enough to keep the weather out, and walked back to the farmhouse through a pasture lit silver by a high October moon. Clover went up to the porch first and turned back to look at her mother. And her face in the moonlight was the face of a young woman who had just understood something about her own bloodline that had reordered her entire sense of who she was. "Mama, Grandma chose right." "Yes, baby." She did. They slept on the dust-sheeted couches in the parlor that night, fully clothed under wool throws Weston brought from his truck, and Thea did not sleep so much as drift, listening to the house settle around her like a thing waking up after a long sleep, listening to the barn out beyond the pasture stand its long, patient watch. In the morning, everything would change. Melanie Dubois arrived at Ironwood Farm at 9 o'clock the next morning in a dark blue Subaru with a Marshall University parking sticker on the rear window. She was in her 60s, short and sturdy, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of wire-rimmed glasses favored by people who had spent their lives reading faded handwriting by lamplight. When she got out of the car, she stood in the drive for a long moment looking at the barn, and Thea, watching from the porch, saw the older woman press one hand flat against her own chest as though something physical had struck her there. Melanie walked up the porch steps slowly. When Thea extended her hand, Melanie took it in both of hers and held it. "Miss Brennan," she said, and her voice was quiet and careful. "Dr. Ballard told me on the phone last night what you found. I did not sleep. I drove around Charleston 3 times before I could bring myself to come out here because I have been looking for this place since I was 9 years old." "Come in," Thea said. "Please." There's coffee." They sat at the kitchen table, the four of them, Thea, Clover, Weston, and Meline, and Thea laid Isaiah's journal on the oilcloth tablecloth between them. Meline put her glasses on and opened it, and Thea watched a woman who had spent 50 years as a professional historian read a document that she had also spent her entire life searching for as a descendant. The professional and the personal sat in Meline's face at the same time, and neither won out because there was no contest. Tears slid under her glasses, and she did not wipe them away. "This is a national landmark," she said when she could speak. "You understand that, don't you? This is one of the most intact Underground Railroad stations ever documented." The written records alone, she shook her head. "Miss Brennan, Thea, what you have here is beyond price, and it is sacred ground. Those 3 graves in your pasture are sacred ground." "What do we do?" Thea asked. "Whatever you want to do. Every decision is yours." Meline looked up from the journal. "But if you are willing, I can have a team of historians and preservation architects out here by Friday. I can contact the National Park Service. I can help you apply for landmark status. I can put you in touch with the descendant families who have been writing to your family for 130 years, and some of them, Thea, some of them are going to want to come here. They're going to want to stand in that chamber. They're going to want to sit on those bunks." "Then let them come," Thea said. "All of them." Meline reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Your mother was a very brave woman. I hope you know that. I'm starting to." By noon, Meline had made 4 phone calls. By 2 o'clock, a preservation architect from West Virginia University was on the road. By 4 o'clock, a journalist from the Charleston Gazette-Mail was parked at the mouth of the driveway, asking for permission to photograph the barn. Thea, to her own astonishment, said yes, because Lillian's letter had given her the choice, and she had made it. The story broke in the Gazette-Mail on Thursday morning under the headline "Hidden Underground Railroad Station Discovered on West Virginia Farm. 7 Generations of Silent Keepers." By Thursday afternoon, it had been picked up by the Associated Press. By Friday, it was on the national news. By Saturday morning, Thea's phone, which she had finally charged at Weston's house because Ironwood had no power, had 47 missed calls. 2 of them were from Corbin. 3 were from Tamsin. The Bronco was parked in front of Ezra's gas station on Saturday afternoon. Thea had driven down to use the bathroom and buy a sandwich when a black SUV she did not recognize pulled in behind her. Corbin got out of the driver's side. Tamsin got out of the passenger side. Phaedra stayed in the back seat with her arms crossed. "Thea," Corbin said, "you tried for warmth and did not quite make it. Sis, we've been trying to reach you. The service is bad out here," Thea said. "We saw the news." "I imagine you did." Tamsin stepped forward, and her voice was high and bright in the way Tamsin's voice went high and bright when she was about to attempt a manipulation. "Thea, we had no idea. None of us knew. If Mama had told us what was on that property." "She didn't tell you," Thea said, "because she didn't want you to know." "That's not fair." "It's exactly fair. Mama knew what each of us would do with the truth, Tamsin, and she gave us each what she thought we could hold. You got the money. Corbin got the house. I got the history. And you know what? I think she was right." Corbin's face tightened. "Thea, be reasonable. Whatever's on that property, the historical value, whatever people are saying it might be worth to museums, to the government, that's family legacy. That belongs to all of us. We're talking to a lawyer in Charleston about." "Stop." Thea said it quietly, but Corbin stopped. "Mama's will is ironclad. Silas Ashford drafted it. I've already talked to him. The farm and every last object on it are mine, solely and completely, with the express instruction that neither of you has any claim or access." Those were Mama's exact words. Silas read them to you in that office. You laughed, Corbin. You called it a dump. Corbin's mouth opened. It closed again. "Go home," Thea said. "Please. There is nothing here for you." 2 years later, Thea stood on the porch of Ironwood Farm at dawn and watched the first tour bus of the season turn up the driveway. The farmhouse had been restored. Not gentrified, not modernized past recognition, but quietly and faithfully brought back to what it had been, with heart pine floors refinished, the wraparound porch rebuilt with matching cedar. the kitchen still holding the original hand pump, and the black iron cookstove beside a new gas range discreet enough that visitors barely noticed it. The roof was sound. The well worked. The windows looked out on pasture that had been mowed and fenced and populated now with 6 rescue horses Weston had helped her take in from a neighboring county's abuse case. The barn had been preserved, not restored in a way that erased its age, but stabilized in a way that would let it stand another 170 years. The gambrel roof had new chestnut shingles milled from timber harvested from the back 40. The stalls along the east wall had been left exactly as Thea Brennan had built them, with the floor of the first stall now bearing a glass inspection panel through which visitors could see down into the chamber below. The chamber itself had been declared a National Historic Landmark 14 months after the first Gazette Mail article. A small brass plaque at the top of the stone steps read, in Thea's own chosen words, the Ironwood Station, kept in silence by 7 generations of the Brennan family, opened in gratitude by the 8th. The 3 graves in the back pasture had been located by ground-penetrating radar and marked at last with headstones of West Virginia limestone. Melanie Du Bois had spent 16 months cross-referencing Isaiah's journal entries against descendant family records, and 2 of the 3 had been identified by name. The 3rd remained Unknown Traveler, 1856. Thea had ordered the headstones with equal care and equal dignity. The Unknown Traveler was visited just as often as the named ones. The Brennan Homestead and Ironwood Station Historic Site had opened to the public the previous spring. It operated as a small educational nonprofit. Melanie was the director of historical interpretation. Weston sat on the board. Clover, who had deferred college by a year, gave the guided tours on weekends and was now 19, accepted to the history program at West Virginia University, intending to become a preservationist herself. The gold coins from Isaiah's strongbox had been appraised and, in accordance with Lillian's letter, used as seed funding for a scholarship program for descendants of the freedom seekers documented in the journals. 12 scholarships had been awarded in the first year alone. Thea had not become wealthy. She had become something else. She had become a keeper. Clover came out onto the porch beside her, carrying 2 mugs of coffee and wearing the navy fleece with the site's embroidered logo that the volunteers all wore on tour days. "Mama," Aunt Tamsin called again last night. She left a voicemail. Thea took the coffee. What did it say? It said she'd like to come for a visit. Just her, not Uncle Lowell. She said she understands if you say no. Thea watched the tour bus pull up and the first visitors begin to step down. An elderly black gentleman was being helped down by his grown granddaughter. He stopped at the foot of the bus and looked at the barn for a long moment before he took a step forward, and Thea knew, without being told, that this was one of the descendant families. She knew it the way Melanie had known, the way Ezra had known, the way her mother must have known 1,000 times in the long, quiet years of waiting. His name was Mr. Elias Carter. He was 87 years old, and he had flown in from Detroit with his granddaughter the night before. And Melanie had told Thea over the phone that morning that Mr. Carter was the great-great-grandson of the woman Isaiah had written about on the very first page of his 1851 journal. The woman called Hannah, the mother of the child whose name was Grace. Thea came down off the porch slowly. She crossed the gravel drive, and when she reached him, Mr. Carter took her hand in both of his, and his hands were thin and warm and trembled slightly with age, and he looked up at her with eyes that had been crying quietly since he stepped off the bus. "Miss Brennan," he said, "I have waited my whole life for this morning. My grandmother told me about Hannah and Grace when I was 7 years old. She told me there had been a station in West Virginia. She told me there had been a family who kept it. She did not know the name of the family. She only knew that they had taken her grandmother in for a single day and a single night, and that her grandmother had walked out of that station alive, and that everything Carter had ever been or would ever be in this world began under the floor of a barn whose location nobody in our family ever learned." He pressed her hand. "I came to thank your people. I came to thank yours on behalf of mine." Thea could not speak. She nodded. She walked him to the barn herself. She did not give the tour that day. Clover did. Thea sat in the chamber with Mr. Carter and his granddaughter, while Clover read aloud from Isaiah's journal. The entry about Hannah and Grace, the entry that had been the first her own family had ever known of the people whose lives they had been part of saving. Mr. Carter listened with his head bowed and his hand gripping his granddaughter's, and when Clover finished, he said, very softly, "Grace was my great-grandmother. She lived to be 91 years old. She raised 11 children. She told her grandchildren that someone in the mountains had let them sleep one night. That was all she ever said, that somebody had let them sleep." He looked up at Thea. "You let her sleep, Miss Brennan." "My family did," Thea said. "I just opened the door." "You opened the door. That is everything. That is the whole of it." When the Carters left that afternoon, Mr. Carter stood at the bottom of the porch steps and looked back at the barn one more time. He held his granddaughter's arm tightly. He nodded once at the building, the way a man nods at a friend he is unlikely to see again. Then he got back on the bus, and the bus turned, and the dust rose, and Thea sat down on the top porch step and put her face in her hand for the second time in 2 years. Clover sat down beside her. They did not speak for a long while. "Mama," Clover said finally, "I want to tell you something." "Tell me." "When Grandma left you the farm, and Aunt Tamsin and Uncle Corbin laughed at us in that office, I was so angry I could barely breathe. I sat in the car waiting for you, and I made a list in my head of everything I would say to them when I was old enough that they couldn't laugh at me anymore." Clover paused. "I don't need that list anymore. I want you to know that. They don't matter. They never mattered. Grandma saw it, and you see it, and now I see it too. They're not the story. We are." Thea pulled her daughter against her side, and they sat there on the porch steps in the long October light. "Let her come," Thea said. Tamsin arrived the following Saturday. She had lost weight. She wore no jewelry. She stood in the driveway for a long time before she came up the porch steps, and when she finally did, she did not attempt to hug her sister. She simply stood there and said, "I was wrong. About everything. I don't know how to fix what I did, Thea. I don't think I can. But I wanted to say it out loud, to your face, with no lawyer and no husband and nobody else listening. I was wrong, and I am sorry." Thea looked at her sister for a long moment. Then she said, "Would you like to see it?" Tamsin nodded once and did not trust her voice. They walked through the barn together, and Thea showed her the chamber and the journals and the graves in the back pasture. Tamsin did not speak. She read 3 full pages of Isaiah's journal in the dim chamber light with her hand pressed to her mouth. And at the end of the 3rd page, she made a small sound that Thea had not heard her sister make since they were children. At the headstone of the unknown traveler, she knelt down in the grass, and she put her palm flat on the stone, and she cried the way a person cries when she has understood, 30 years too late, that she has been measuring her whole life with the wrong instrument. When they walked back to the porch, Tamsin sat on the top step and would not look at Thea for a long while. Then she said, "Lowell is leaving me. I think you should know that. He found someone younger. I am not telling you this for sympathy. I am telling you because I think Mama saw it coming. I think Mama knew that everything I built my life around was going to crumble, and she gave me money instead of meaning because she knew I would need the money to survive what was coming." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "She gave you the meaning because she knew you already had everything else. Tamsin, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for permission to come back. Sometimes. To help. To learn. I cannot undo what I did in that office. But I would like to learn how to be a person who would not have done it. If you will let me try." If Thea's story moved you tonight, take a moment and think about your own life. Think about the people in your family who were called the difficult ones, the quiet ones, the overlooked ones. Think about who in your family was given the hardest thing instead of the easiest, and ask yourself what that person was being trusted to carry that nobody else could carry. Sometimes love does not look like favor. Sometimes love looks like faith. Sometimes the parent who passes you over is the parent who saw you most clearly of all. Thea's story teaches us 3 truths worth carrying with us. The first is that being overlooked is not the same as being unloved. Lillian Brennan watched her quiet daughter for 52 years, and what she saw was not a woman who needed protection, but a woman who could be trusted with the most important thing the family owned. The world will tell you that love is measured in square footage and bank balances and the size of the inheritance. The world is wrong. Real love measures you in courage and gives you exactly the weight it knows you can carry. The second truth is that the silence of those who came before us is not always the silence of forgetting. Sometimes it is the silence of protection. 7 generations of Brennans kept the Ironwood Station secret because the world they lived in would have punished them for the truth. They were not ashamed of what their family had done. They were keeping it alive until somebody could hold it openly. Every family has silences like this. Every bloodline carries something that one generation buries, so the next generation can survive long enough to dig it up. If your people were quiet about something, ask yourself what they were keeping safe. Ask yourself what they were trusting you to one day uncover. And the third truth is the one Thea spoke aloud on her porch that October evening. The greatest inheritance is not what you are given. It is what you are trusted with. Money will be spent. Houses will be sold. Jewelry will be lost. But a truth handed down across 7 generations and laid into the hands of the one descendant strong enough to carry it into the light. That is an inheritance that does not diminish. That is an inheritance that grows every time it is shared. That is the kind of inheritance that turns a daughter who was passed over in her mother's will into the most respected woman in all of Appalachia. Not because she became wealthy, but because she became faithful. Thea Brennan was passed over in her mother's will. And what she got, what was sealed beneath those stalls, was the only thing in that family worth keeping. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight. We have viewers from every continent on this channel, and it never stops moving us to see how a story like Thea's, set in a small West Virginia hollow, finds its way into the hearts of people in Sao Paulo and Manila and Lagos and Toronto and Sydney. Drop your city in the comments. Tell us if Thea's story reminded you of someone in your own family, someone who was quiet, someone who was overlooked, someone who turned out to be the keeper of something more precious than anyone realized. Share this story with that person. They may need to hear tonight that they were not forgotten. They were chosen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.